Adam Smith is famous for arguing that in competitive markets, the self-interested pursuit of profit will produce benefits to the economy and to society. It's less well known that in the other book, in his other book, that is The Theory of Moral Sentiments, he argued that social customs, norms, rules, what he called moral sentiments, benefit the economy and society and improve well-being. Mark Carney, in his Reith Lectures, which came out in 2020, argued that both moral sentiments and market sentiments promote well-being, but market sentiments have recently strengthened to the detriment of moral sentiments. So I take my cue from these ideas. I want to examine the quality of society. The measures available are trust and fairness. To the extent to which people can interact reliably and fruitfully, that is reflected in perceived trust. To the extent to which people feel that their position relative to other people is justifiable, that is reflected in the degree of perceived fairness. So the question arises, are lack of fairness and lack of trust liable to make people unhappy? Now, there is a third dimension to the quality of society, and that is a sense of community, which provides fellow feeling and cooperation, sense of identity. Putnam introduced the idea of social capital, two sorts of social capital. There's bridging social capital, which is inclusive, helps you to get ahead, and also bonding social capital, which is more exclusive, helps you to get by through your interaction with your group. But unfortunately, we don't have any good social capital variables in our data set. So I'm going to report happiness functions, which include trust, and happiness functions which include fairness. I've got 6 tables, but I'm just going to summarize them because it'll take too long. And this is research conducted with Ramani Gunatilaka. I shall explain my journey into Elysian studies. It happened by accident. I was looking at unemployment in South Africa, which is very high, of course. And I found it useful to look at the nature of unemployment. And I found, using happiness functions, and I found robust, understandable happiness functions. Now, I've been a member of the China Household Income Project for 30 years. And that gave me an idea. Why not design a happiness module for the 2002 National Household Survey? And this was repeated in later surveys. So I managed to produce a dozen papers exploring new questions about happiness in China and about happiness in general. But I'm not fully a happiness specialist. We're going to use the China Household Income Project household surveys for 2013 with some reference to 2002. These are nationally representative samples from the NBS annual household surveys, which are enormous. So we take a sample from these and we use the NBS data, but we've also got quite a lot of specially designed research questions in there. There are separate urban and rural samples, and this is for good reason, and both samples have more than 10,000 households. There's a lot of information on individuals, households, communities, and we have enough observations in each village or city to permit village or city analysis. We have several attitudinal questions, categorical variables, but they could be cardinalized. How happy are you nowadays? Very happy, happy, so-so, unhappy, not at all happy. Is the national income distribution fair? Or is the income distribution in your city fair? Again, very fair and fair. They had to combine these two because there's very few very fairs in there. Not fair, not at all fair. And a combined score. Note that there's a very low mean fairness score. somewhere between not fair and not at all fair. Are your relatives and friends very trustworthy, trustworthy, so-so, not trustworthy, not at all? Or are other people very trustworthy? So we can also produce a combined score. Note the importance of guanxi, which is a notion of social capital which is important in China. It effectively represents relatives and friends. It arises, I think, out of China's weakness in commercial law. So we had to rely on other ways of trusting people. Relative income. How does your household's living standard compare with the average in your village or your city? Much above, at average income, below, or much below. And this has turned out in research to be a very powerful explanatory variable. Okay, turning now to trust. First of all, the literature. The Nordic countries have among the highest trust scores in the world, and also among the highest happiness scores. So that positive association suggests that trust increases happiness. And there is cross-country analysis using the World Value Survey, which found a positive association between trust and happiness. And it was confirmed as causal with internal instruments. John Helliwell, using the World Value Survey, found that both individual trust and average trust in the country raise happiness. So living in a high trust society, a country appears to increase happiness. But maybe social capital, a sense of community and fellow feeling, is the causal variable. Trust might merely be a component or a consequence of social capital. But even if it is just a proxy, it's still an aspect of the quality of society. So under trust, I have two hypotheses. Hypothesis one, trust increases happiness, and hypothesis two, the mean village or city trust increases happiness. So hypothesis one, we tried trust scores as a continuous variable and also 5 trust categorical variables, which are rising in trustworthiness. We get the same pattern. So I'll just mention the continuous results. There's a full set of explanatory variables, which are well behaved in the normal way. So happiness varies between 0 and 4. The coefficient on the trust score is significantly positive. Relatives and friends, it's 0.147. For others, 0.140, a combined 0.105. The 3 stars means 1% significance level. So it's consistent at least with trust-raising happiness. I won't bother about going through the tables. Turning to the rural table, again, the trust score has significant positive coefficients. Relatives and friends, 0.158, others 0.116, combined 0.097. Interesting that trust in other people yields more subjective well-being in urban than in rural China. Possibly it's because there are fewer sanctions in the city, so that if you do trust people, that's a greater benefit to you. The conditional difference between, say, combined, this is the combined score, non-trustworthy and trustworthy is 0.390. So again, there's support for hypothesis one. So turning to hypothesis two, again, we've got a full set of explanatory variables, but I only show the individual trust and the average locality trust coefficients. The rural trust scores tend to be higher than urban scores because I think there's more effective scrutiny of unscrupulous people in the village. So all 15 trust coefficients are significantly positive, and the group trust coefficients are between being the same as the individual trust coefficients or half the individual trust coefficients in the cities and the villages, and all are significant. So again, there is support for hypothesis two. So the effect of introducing mean trust coefficients is to reduce the individual coefficients somewhat. So there is some positive collinearity between the two. It could be that there are unobserved determinants of trust in the community which determine both of them, and that's Mansky's reflection problem. Or it could be an infectious effect. If a person encounters trusted people, he or she is more likely to trust others. So those who live in a high trust or a low trust society are influenced by the average level of trust. Now it's possible to produce a simple model in which mean trust has high or low stable equilibria, and there's instability between them. As a test, it would be nice to find a Bactrian, not an Arabian camel, in the frequency distribution of mean trusts of villages and cities. In fact, there are not two humps, but there's hardly one either. Mean trust varies greatly in the sample. Okay, turning now to fairness. Now, fairness can be about more than income inequality, but our urban questionnaire specifies income inequality. Not all income inequality is perceived to be unfair, but income inequality may particularly reduce happiness when it is deemed to be unfair. Deaton has made a thing of this distinction. The literature that's closest to us is a cross-country analysis from the World Values Survey. Jovskov was aiming at something rather different, but he got the following results as well. Higher income inequality decreases happiness. Higher fairness increases happiness. And fairness weakens the effect of income inequality on happiness. So the hypotheses, hypothesis 1, fairness raises happiness. Hypothesis 2, fairness reduces the negative effect of income inequality on happiness. Unfortunately, there's no measure of fairness in the 2013 survey, so we had to go to the 2002 survey, which generally produces very similar results. Now, fairness, of course, could be endogenous. There could be personality effects on both fairness and happiness. And in a cross-section, it's difficult to find good instruments for fairness because there are so many possible influences on happiness. I'll come back to this. Okay, hypothesis 1, taking urban 2002 sample and fairness as defined above. We found a powerful effect of relative income on happiness. The difference in coefficients between the top and the bottom city or town income quarters is 1.174. When F is expressed as a cardinal value or a set of 3 dummy variables, we get strong results. Highly significant positive effect of fairness on happiness. The fairness score coefficient is 0.102. So we have some support for hypothesis 1. Turning to the rural sample, the rural questionnaire has different fairness questions. There are 3 proxies we could find for village fairness: whether there were harmonious relations in the village, whether the cadres served as spokesmen for the villagers, and whether cadres moderate conflict within the village. So 5 answers to each of these, and we had dummy variables or a cardinal score running from 0 to 12. The coefficient on fairness in the fairness score is 0.062, where the mean score is 8.2. Standard deviation about 2. Going from the lowest to the fairness happiness category, the coefficient is 0.365. Again, this is consistent with hypothesis 1. Hypothesis 2. Here I introduced interaction terms. So I've got a table, which I will go through, which shows matrices of interaction terms, income quarter against fairness category. I'll explain it by reference to the combined fairness results panel 1. Here we have an interaction term in which quarter 1, which is the highest income quarter, and fairness 1, which is the lowest fairness quarter, are the omitted categories. So they're not. Because of that, all the fairness 1 quarters are 0, and all the quarter 1 fairness coefficients are 0. So what we're measuring is the divergence of the other cells from the omitted category, the 0 category.
Sorry, so just a clarification. So
Yeah.
quarters are quarters of the year or quarters of the distribution? I'm a little confused.
The coefficient of?
No, quarters are quarters of the year or quarters of the income distribution. I'm not sure.
I'm looking at the coefficients here on the interaction terms.
I understand that, but what are the quarters?
The quarters. These are, people were asked, do you fall into quarter 1, the top 25% of the income?
Okay, so these are
in the
self-reported
city?
income quartiles.
It was not, it was people's reports of which category they fell into, not
Right.
the actual
Okay,
number.
so is there a divergence between what they report and what where they are, or you don't have that information?
We could check on that, yes. That might be interesting. Yes, that would be interesting. Yes.
Okay, thanks. Sorry to interrupt. I just wasn't
not
quite
at all.
sure what the quarters were.
No, that's helpful, right. So what we see is that the greatest divergence is for quarter 4, the poorest quarter, and for fairness 3, where the figure is 0.6424. Again, in the national fairness figure, it's 0.9487. What this shows is that for the poorest group, for them, regarding income inequality as being fair is a greater assistance than it is for the richer groups. So the poor people, for them, it's very important that they should regard income distribution as being fair. If we run the equations without the interaction terms, then we see a very powerful effect of income quarter on happiness, rising with income, and we see a very powerful effect of fairness on happiness, rising with fairness. But here we're standardizing for these things, and we're looking at the interaction term itself. We can come back to that if people are, if I've not explained it well. So the implication is that the poorest urban people derive most additional happiness from regarding their relative income as fair or very fair. They feel relative deprivation most keenly, but less so if they don't regard the relative income as unfair. Okay, instrumenting. This, I'm afraid, is unfinished business. It's difficult to find valid instruments in cross-section happiness equations. We tried external instruments, for instance, father's education, mother's education, not successful. We may go on trying some other variables. Alternatively, one could use internal heteroskedasticity-based instruments. There's a paper by Lubel in 2012, which outlines how this can be done, and it is becoming more widely used. We've used it successfully in another paper. However, the 10 equations in which fairness is to be instrumented, the internal instruments, only a couple so far provide evidence that the effect is causal. Most of the others fail the condition that the errors must be heteroskedastic, so we can't use the test. But I think it's important to persevere because editors expect it. To conclude, economist approaches are usually rather individualistic. We tend to ignore the societal environment in which individual decisions are made. We play down the things that can't be rigorously analyzed or reliably quantified. But this neglects understanding of variables which economists should be concerned about, such as well-being. So institutions, culture, norms, policy, law can help promote the quality of society. Mark Carney and Manoush Shafik have both written books last year, and they argue that society relies on social norms and conventions for maintaining social stability and economic efficiency. And they argue this is endangered in market-obsessed Western economies. Well, I hope I've produced a brushstroke to that bigger picture. Thank you.
Thank you, John.